It is said that on July 16th, 1251, Our Lady appeared to Simon Stock, and she handed him a brown scapular, and she said, "This shall be a privilege for you and all Carmelites, that anyone dying in this habit shall not suffer eternal fire."
It says, whoever dies wearing the scapular shall not suffer eternal fire. That's pretty big. You might want to hold on to that one, wear it every day.
Whoever dies wearing this scapular will not suffer eternal fire. And this promise is extended to any Catholic who wears a brown scapular, who's enrolled in the brown scapular. This is the one I wear. It's just a simple, it's kind of like a necklace with a cloth in the front and the back.
Whosoever dies wearing this scapular shall not suffer eternal fire. That's a hell of a promise, isn't it? Does it sound too good to be true? I'm agnostic now, but even if I was still Catholic, I would have pretty severe reservations about the brown scapular. Not just because it sounds too good to be true, but because it seems confusing and seemingly contradictory statements from Catholic authorities have been made about what the scapular even does. And also because the historicity of the scapular is, well, I can't even say shaky. It's not shaky. It's firmly understood by every historian I've come across as not authentic. And we've known this for over 100 years. Let's talk about it. Let's start with a brief summary of where the scapular comes from. You know what's funny is that I've been doing a bunch of videos about Marian apparitions, and this script actually started as a script about Our Lady of Mount Carmel. But so much of the story of Our Lady of Mount Carmel is actually just about the scapular, and there's not actually that much to say about Our Lady of Mount Carmel without the scapular, that I thought I would just turn this into a video about the scapular instead. Anyway, let's talk about the origins of the scapular and Our Lady of Mount Carmel. To present this information to you in the most authentically Catholic way that I could think of, I found some random church bulletin from the internet that was talking about the scapular. Thank you, St. Thomas the Apostle Catholic Church in Chickasaw, Alabama, for your contribution. This is St. Thomas the Apostle Catholic Church, and from their website, you can find this PDF. The brown scapular. This is just a church bulletin. It's not super official or anything like that, but this is a good representation of how I learned about the scapular. So reading from the part that is labeled history. In the year 1251, in the town of Aylesford in England, Our Lady appeared to St. Simon Stock, a Carmelite. She handed him a brown woolen scapular and said, "This shall be a privilege for you and all Carmelites, that anyone dying in this habit shall not suffer eternal fire." In time, the church extended this magnificent privilege to all laity who are willing to be invested in the brown scapular of the Carmelites and who perpetually wear it. And for those of you who don't know, the Carmelites are a religious order, and laity just means people who aren't in a religious order. There's more interesting information under the Sabbatine privilege. The Blessed Virgin of Mount Carmel has promised to save those who wear the scapular from the fires of hell. That is what we just read. She will also shorten their stay in purgatory if they should pass from this world still owing some kind of debt of punishment. So to Our Lady of Mount Carmel, so to St. Simon Stock, Our Lady of Mount Carmel only said it'll prevent you from going to hell. She didn't say it would prevent you from a really long stay in purgatory. But she does say that it will shorten your stay in purgatory. Now, she didn't say that to St. Simon Stock. This promise is found in a bull of Pope John the 22nd. A bull is just a papal document. The Blessed Virgin appeared to him, to Pope John the 22nd, and speaking of those who wear the brown scapular, she said, "I, the Mother of Grace, shall descend on the Saturday after their death, and whomsoever I shall find in purgatory, I shall free, so that I may lead them to the holy mountain of life everlasting." Now, the Blessed Virgin Mary did assign certain conditions that must be fulfilled in order for her to descend into purgatory on the first Saturday after your death. Those conditions are as follows. You have to, first, wear the brown scapular continuously. Second, observe chastity according to your state in life. So that doesn't mean that you have to be, you can't ever procreate. You can if you're married. And then number 3, you have to fulfill one of the following conditions. Either recite daily the little office of the Blessed Virgin Mary, or observe the fasts of the church and abstain from meat on Ash Wednesdays or Saturdays, or with permission of a priest, say 5 decades of the rosary every day, or with permission of a priest, substitute some other good work. I think that is essentially the needed background on the scapular. Our Lady appeared to St. Simon Stock, the head of the Carmelite order, in 1251, telling him and all Carmelites to wear the scapular. And then she appeared to the Pope in 1322, 70 years later, and kind of like ratified or reiterated what she said to St. Simon Stock, as well as adding an additional promise as long as you met some conditions. That's enough background for now. So now let's talk about some of the problems that I see with the scapular. So let's take the promises that Our Lady made to St. Simon Stock and Pope John the 22nd at face value. I made this flowchart that I would like to share with you to explain how the Sabbatine privilege works. So I guess first you had to have died, and then if you did not die wearing the scapular, well then you're on your own. You could go to heaven, hell, or purgatory. Notice too that in this chart I have purgatory light and purgatory heavy. Purgatory light just means that you're only going to be in purgatory until the next Saturday after your death. Purgatory heavy just means you're going to be in purgatory for however long you were going to be in purgatory anyway. But all of that to say, if you don't die with the scapular on, you're on your own. You might go to hell if you don't have the scapular on. But if you die wearing the scapular, hell is not an option. Take a look at the yes and the no that comes off of the conditional off of the answer to yes to did you die wearing the scapular. None of them lead to hell. If you died wearing the scapular, but you did not fulfill the terms and conditions as laid out in Sacrissimo Uti Culmine, that papal bull, if you did not fulfill them, then yeah, you might go to purgatory heavy. But I mean, also maybe purgatory light, because maybe it just kind of works out that you only needed a split second in purgatory anyway, and you might just go straight to heaven if you died a martyr or something like that. And if you did die wearing the scapular and fulfilling those terms and conditions as laid out in that papal bull, then you won't even go to purgatory heavy. You'll either go straight to heaven or you'll go to purgatory, but only until the first Saturday after your death. Not too bad, right? That is the promise as laid out by the words of Our Lady of Mount Carmel to both St. Simon Stock and Pope John the 22nd. Does this seem a little weird at the face of it? Whatever happened to needing to die in a state of grace in order to get to heaven? If you're not Catholic, I should probably remind you that purgatory is essentially the same thing as going to heaven. Sure, you might need to hang out in purgatory until the second coming, but what's a few thousand years or even a few 100,000 years compared to eternity? Once you're in purgatory, you know that you're going to heaven. So yes, you might need to be purified in the cleansing fire of purgatory for a couple 100,000 years, but that's a drop in the bucket compared to eternity. So if the scapular is a guarantee of heaven eventually, even if you might go to purgatory, does that mean that I can just sin as much as I want while I'm wearing the scapular? For the record, the answer that I always heard growing up was that it's actually impossible to die while you're wearing the scapular if you're in a state of mortal sin. As in, if you're about to die and you're in a state of mortal sin and you have the scapular on, something is going to make the scapular come off your body so that you die without it on, or you'll be miraculously kept alive until you can confess, and then you'll die. In my little community, the story that we were all told was about this motorcyclist who was wearing the scapular kind of because he's a cultural Catholic, but he was an unrepentant mortal sinner. Well, he got into a motorcycle accident and his scapular flew off his body before he died, and his body was found in the woods, and his scapular was found hanging from the tree. So he died without the scapular on, even though he lived his whole life with the scapular on because he was an unrepentant mortal sinner. Well, it seems like my little community's story is not entirely unique. 1 Peter 5 is a trad Catholic news organization, and they have an article called The Browne Scapular and the Sabbatine Privilege. right here in their article, they write, lest anyone think that someone can get away with abusing the scapular, there is the story of the impenitent habitual sinner who begged the hospital nurses to take off his scapular because it was burning him, and then he died soon after the scapular was removed. Okay. But right above it, he writes about people who actually survived long enough because like they had mortal sins on their souls, but God knew that they would repent if they could live long enough, and they were wearing the scapular, so God let them live long enough to confess. So there was a soldier who had part of his head taken off by a bullet, but he lived long enough to have a priest come hear his confession because he was wearing the scapular. And another one about a man in Ohio who was wearing the scapular, and he got split in half while working on a railroad track, but he stayed long enough alive to have a priest hear his confession. Again, it's implied because he had the scapular on. And yeah, that just seems really hard to prove that nobody has ever died with a scapular on while in a state of mortal sin. But the answer here is no. Of course you can't sin all you want. In fact, if you die with a mortal sin on your soul, you'll go to hell. This has been the Orthodox Catholic teaching since as long as I can remember. At this website where you can like ask a priest a question, it's kind of like Catholic Answers, but for priests, somebody asked, would the scapular save somebody who died in mortal sin? And Father Edward Mickemail said the short answer is no. The scapular will not save anyone who dies in unrepentant mortal sin. Speaking of Catholic Answers, there is a semi-self-aware Catholic Answers article about the scapular that seems to anticipate the common critique of the scapular. Father Hugh Barber, the author of this article for Catholic Answers, says that an assertion that somebody who dies with a mortal sin on their souls but wearing a scapular will go to heaven anyway seems to confirm the worst stereotypes of Catholic devotion to physical objects of piety. Imagine eternal life guaranteed just for having a little piece of magic cloth around your neck. Well, Father goes on to explain that this is not how it works. Further on in this article, Father writes, it must be remembered, however, that this is not magic. It assumes an attachment to and perseverance in prayer and some form of penance, not just the wearing of the physical object. This same idea is expressed by Father Gregory Pine of Ascension Presents. In a video called How the Scapular Works, Father Pine also says that scapulars are not magic.
What we want to do is cultivate like a real sacramental sensibility about the scapular, and the sacraments are different than magic, because with magic, you just say, whatever Harry Potter says, and then the thing happens. Whereas with sacraments work by virtue of belief, right? So they work provided that one performs them and receives them faithfully.
But hold on, this isn't what Our Lady of Mount Carmel said. Our Lady of Mount Carmel did not say, wear this, and then you'll be reminded to live virtuously so that you'd have gone to heaven whether or not you were wearing the scapular because of how virtuous of a life that you lived. No, she said, whosoever dies wearing this scapular shall not suffer eternal fire. And I do not believe for one moment that there has never been an unrepentant kid of a devout Catholic mom who got into a car accident or became very sick or something, and mom went to the hospital, and while her son was dying, she took off her scapular and put it on him. And I say this because this almost happened to me. When I was like 18 or 19 or something, I had a bad reaction to a lidocaine injection when I was going into not even a hospital, just like a clinic, for a rather routine procedure. Because of this weird reaction that I had to lidocaine, I actually had a tonic-clonic seizure. I passed out and I woke up, and that's all I remember. But apparently I was out for 20 or 30 seconds, and for those 20 or 30 seconds, I was seizing. I was shaking around and I was kind of clenching my jaw and stuff like that. And again, I don't remember this, but apparently my mom told me after the fact that, another 5 seconds and she would have taken off her scapular and she would have put it on me. And she told me this. And I told you I was 18 or 19. And if you know my story, I was still Catholic when I was 18 or 19. So why wasn't I wearing the scapular by then? Well, because I actually stopped wearing my scapular like significantly before any of my other Catholic beliefs began to fade away. Anyway, Imagine 18-year-old Kevin had a worse seizure. One so bad that he never woke up. Imagine that my mom did put her scapular on me and I died wearing a scapular. But imagine that I also unrepentantly ate meat the day before I died, and that day before I died just so happened to be Ash Wednesday. Eating meat on Ash Wednesday and not being sorry for it is a mortal sin. And obviously my choice of a mortal sin here is kind of tongue-in-cheek, but imagine I was an unrepentant mortal sinner, and imagine that my mom put a scapular on me and then I died. That has absolutely happened at some point in the past. And why would a parent do that? Well, because they believe in the promise that Our Lady of Mount Carmel made, that whosoever dies wearing a scapular will not suffer eternal fire. Period. End of sentence. Full stop. It's not about living a virtuous life. It's about the promise of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Anyway, I don't normally get too Jordan Peterson-y on this channel, but there is something to Jordan Peterson's whole thing about you act as if you believe or whatever.
Is what you believe what you say or what you act out? Now, I would say to some degree it's both, but if push comes to shove, as far as I'm concerned, what you believe is what you act out, not what you say.
And I think that Catholics, at least the trad Catholics that I grew up with, act as if they believe in the promise of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. They take it at face value. The more, and I hate to say it like this, but the more intellectual Catholics who will reason with the scapular by saying oh, it's just a reminder to make you live a virtuous life. That's not how Catholics treat it. And I have more than just personal examples. Pope St. John Paul II, quote, insisted that doctors not remove his scapular during his emergency surgery following the assassination attempt on his life on May 13th, 1981, the Feast of Our Lady of Fatima. Father Mariano Serra, a Carmelite priest, told Inside the Vatican magazine, quote, just before the Holy Father was operated on, he told the doctors, don't take off the scapular, and the surgeons left it on. If the Pope knew that the scapular wasn't actually going to do anything besides remind him to live a virtuous life, such that if he died, it doesn't matter whether or not he's actually wearing the scapular, why would he tell the surgeons to leave the scapular on when he was going into surgery? Was he afraid that he was going to commit a sin while he was unconscious and being operated on? Almost certainly not. So if he's not afraid that he would instantly commit a sin the moment that he stopped being reminded to live virtuously by the physical scapular, because he knew that he was going to be unconscious, why did he ask for it to stay on his body? Because the Pope was acting as if the scapular actually does something, as if the scapular is magic. He is living as if the words of Our Lady of Mount Carmel are correct and true, and that's not shocking. It's not crazy. If you're somebody who grew up in Catholic culture, in trad Catholic culture probably I should say, then it's not at all crazy to think that even the Pope acted like this. And it's not just the Pope who acts like this. Though I should say that I probably started, or at least my second example, if you count me as the first, was the most Catholic person there is, because it's the Pope. But Amber Rose, the religious hippie, she's a Catholic content creator. She recounts the story of her sister like this.
I know my sister used to wear one consistently, always, even in the shower. And I remember that was an image that kind of stuck with me throughout my teenage years and even till this day. I remember my sister probably about 10 or 11, and she would always wear this brown scapular. And it was scraggly and old and gross and ugh. But she never took it off, and she had a committed devotion to the brown scapular, and that was something that really stuck with me.
Again, do you think that you've been living this virtuous life, but then you might slip and fall in the shower, and then right before your head hits the tile, you would think man, I just really believe that Jesus is 100% God and 0% man, and I don't care if that makes me a heretic. I don't care if that makes me fall outside, the city limits of Rome. I'm unrepentant and I believe in this heresy anyway. And then lights out, you hit the tile and you die. And you need the scapular to remind you in your last moments while your head is falling in the shower. Is that what you're afraid of? I don't think so. Like, I don't think that people legitimately are going to be like, oh, I'm not going to remember to be virtuous if I don't have this scapular on for the 5 minutes that I'm in the shower. I think that people like Ambrose's sister, like the Pope, like me, like most trad Catholics, treat the scapular as if it actually does something supernatural. It's not just some kind of reminder. They take the words of Our Lady of Mount Carmel seriously. Either yes or no to the question, did Our Lady of Mount Carmel tell the truth, right? Either yes or no to the question, like, is Father Pine's explanation correct? But if one of them is right, then the other one is wrong, right? Because Our Lady of Mount Carmel did not say, hey, use this scapular as a reminder. No, she said this scapular will prevent you from eternal fire. I see another problem too with the scapular. When Our Lady appeared to the Pope, she said that she would take people out of purgatory on the first Saturday after their death. Purgatory is supposed to be like a necessary cleansing of your soul before you go to heaven. You are supposed to actually put yourself in purgatory because you know that you're not perfect enough to go to heaven yet, so you need to suffer to become more perfect. Don't question it. But the point is that purgatory is not a punishment. It's a cleansing procedure. And everybody's only going to be in purgatory for the minimum time that they must be in purgatory in order to be cleansed, right? So how does it make sense that Our Lady would take you out of purgatory early? Like, how does that make any sense? It seems like either the view of purgatory that Our Lady of Mount Carmel has is that purgatory is a punishment. It's not to cleanse you, it's a punishment, and so I'm just going to take you out of your punishment early. Or that it's actually, like, you don't need to be cleansed to go to heaven. Like, you can just die and then go to heaven, good enough. But either way, that seems kind of problematic, right? I mean, the Catechism of the Catholic Church entries 1030 and 1031 define purgatory as a place where the dead undergo purification as to achieve the holiness necessary to enter the joy of heaven. So leaving purgatory before you otherwise would doesn't really make sense to me. What about an option that might let Catholics have their cake and eat it too? Though I should warn, this option comes at a price. What if the entire story of Our Lady of Mount Carmel was a myth? Not real. Made up. Then we can say Our Lady of Mount Carmel didn't lie. She never existed. And the scapulars can still serve as a tool that reminds you to be virtuous because, that's naturalism friendly anyway. If you hadn't already guessed, I believe that the entire story of Our Lady of Mount Carmel is entirely made up. As does literally every single historian that I could find. And I am not kidding. I could not find a single living historian who defends the historicity of the apparition of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And the same is true for that papal bull that I mentioned, Sacratissimo Uti Culmine. That's fake too. The Origin of the Browne Scapular, a critique, was published in 1904, about 120 years ago. And since then, the prevailing opinion of scholars has been that the entire story of Our Lady of Mount Carmel is an invention of the 17th century, 400 years after the apparition. Remember that the supposed apparition took place in 1251. Well, we have no references to the scapular or to an apparition of Our Lady of Mount Carmel to St. Simon Stock himself. And by the way, St. Simon Stock definitely did exist, but we have no records of that are contemporaneous. None. Nothing in the 13th century. But then in 1642, 400 years after the apparition, a Carmelite named John Charon published a document which he said was a 13th century letter written by St. Simon Stock's secretary, Peter Swanington. This letter recounts the story of the apparition and the receiving of the scapular by St. Simon Stock. From this letter, supposedly written by Simon Stock's secretary, arose all of the traditions and devotions to the scapular that we know and love today. But I would like to read from page 64 of the Irish Ecclesiastical Record, volume 16, in which The Origin of the Browne Scapular, a critique, was published in 1904. page 64 reads as follows. The document professes to be what it is not. It is grossly inaccurate in names and dates. It was first heard of 300 years after the death of its supposed author. It was brought to light by a person who was very far from being unbiased or disinterested. It was never submitted to any kind of expert criticism. It disappeared unaccountably when its publication was demanded. That Father Chiron deliberately sat himself down to forge a purely fictitious document, I do not suggest. But that having come across some sort of account a century or more older than his time, he chose to assume that it was a contemporary narrative, attributed it to Swanington, and manipulated it according with his idea. That seems to me to be in the highest degree possible. The author of this article, Father Herbert Thurston, S.J., goes on to talk about all the various reasons why the letter attributed to Peter Swanington is a clear forgery. Peter Swanington gets facts about his own life wrong. He references popes who should not have been in office yet. He refers to feast days that did not exist until long after he died, things like that. For this reason, and I kid you not, I cannot find a single historian who defends the historicity of the apparition of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. It's not just those darn Jesuits who ruin everything who are questioning the historicity of this. Also, you should know that the Jesuits of 1904 are not like the Jesuits of 1975 or the Jesuits of 2023. So just remember that too, that the Jesuits in 1904 don't deserve the same kind of criticism that you might levy at the Jesuits of 2023. The papal bull that I mentioned earlier too, Sacratissimo Uti Culmine, supposedly written by Pope John the 22nd, was definitely not written by Pope John the 22nd. The Catholic Encyclopedia refers to this bull as an apocryphal bull, meaning a bull of doubtful authenticity. And this is the Catholic Encyclopedia of 1912, too. It's not some kind of like recent edition of the Catholic Encyclopedia. Joe Heschmeyer of Shameless Popery fame wrote an article for his blog back in 2009, before his YouTube fame, about the scapular, which he titled "Be Wary of the Sabbatine Privilege." In this article, Joe Heschmeyer writes, "I hate to be a wet blanket, but a lot of the legends surrounding the so-called Browne scapular are just that, legends. My concern about the legends surrounding the Browne scapular is that they seem to contradict a lot of Catholic beliefs on the assurance of salvation." And he adds, "Some scapulars I saw after Mass today said, attach great importance to your scapular. It is an assurance of salvation on justification, salvation through faith, preserved through works, not simply wearing pious jewelry. On the necessity of Christ, the legends surrounding the Browne scapular seem to suggest that Mary is the one who saves us. And purgatory. As I understand it, Catholics view the primary purpose of purgatory as one of purging, not punishing. Being rescued from this necessary process wouldn't be good. In other words, this legend, nefariously perpetuated through forged documents, plays upon the worst impulses in religion. That is, the impulse to turn religion into magic, to assures one's own eternal well-being. In a way, though, I think that the non-historicity of the apparition of Our Lady of Mount Carmel is exactly the escape hatch that Catholics kind of need to escape the problems that Joe Heschmeyer mentions in his article. As in, if the historicity of Our Lady of Mount Carmel was like super solid, that would mean that the scapular kind of is that magic metal that all of the trads treat it like it is anyway. But since the apparition is actually on like the shakiest ground I've ever seen, Catholics are free just to say, hey, this scapular reminds me to be virtuous, so I'll wear it as a reminder to be good, even though I know it's not doing anything supernatural for me. And all you have to do is reject the historicity of the apparition of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and you're good to go. I'd like to reflect upon something, though, before we wrap up. Think about all of the miracle stories that we've heard about the scapular. Remember that one Peter 5 article that lists the man who got split in half but survived long enough to get his confession heard just because he had the scapular on, because that would preserve the promise of the scapular. Think about that guy who said that the scapular was burning him, so he took it off so that he would die without it on. What do we make of those stories in light of the fact that the scapular origin story is clearly a forgery and a myth? Well, I think that we do the same thing with these that we do with any kind of miracle claim from the Mormons or from Islam or from Hinduism or whatever. We admit that a lot of these claims just have nothing solid backing them up other than oral tradition. We admit that these claims do not rise above the level of evidence that should justify belief in any kind of sufficiently skeptical epistemology. In the past, I've said things like, what started my journey out of the Catholic Church is that I realized that I lacked the intuition that morality was teleological in nature. And that is still true. But the scapular for me was like a precursor to all of that. My rejecting of the scapular didn't really cause me to question anything else, not by itself. I knew that the scapular was never like an official thing anyway, even though I know that saints have waxed on and on about the scapular. So I felt safe in rejecting it. But perhaps my rejection of the scapular opened me to questioning things that were more important. It was only a few short years between my rejection of the scapular and my rejection of the Catholic definition of morality. And I know that I'm not alone in my questioning of the scapular. And it seems like most of the people who I grew up with who questioned the scapular are now no longer Catholic. And I'm talking about trads here. I'm talking about trads no longer being Catholic. So obviously this isn't the case for everybody. Joe Heschmeyer is still very much so Catholic. But just anecdotally, I think that the scapular may have been the most common precursor to like predicting that somebody won't be Catholic in the future. Once you stop wearing your scapular, I feel like it's like, okay, you've got, within the next 5 years, you're not Catholic anymore. If you grew up wearing it. I'm not talking about people who never had a devotion to the scapular. And I think that this is, of course, exacerbated when you are forced to wear the scapular, like I was and like most people in my community were. We all got enrolled in the scapular when we received our first Holy Communion, when we were 7 years old. This was not optional. Parents, if you want your kids to remain Catholic, don't force them to wear the scapular. You might even want to consider changing your devotion to the scapular too. Use it as a reminder to be virtuous, sure. But maybe just remember that the whole thing is based on forgeries and myths, and let that temper the severity of your devotion. Thanks, everybody.